Okay, let's unpack this. Brat has recently made some waves with her comments about R. Kelly and his music.
Yeah, definitely causing a stir. We're diving straight into it today.
Our source is a News Life Days article from today, May 19th, 2025, and it details this interview she gave.
And what's really interesting, I think, is how her position, which sounds sort of straightforward on the surface, it just opens up this whole, can of worms about art and artists, especially when their personal lives are, well, deeply troubling.
Exactly. It forces us to confront some really fundamental stuff.
Yeah.
So she basically said, quite plainly, she's not stopping listening to his music.
Right.
And she also brought up the question, where were the parents in all of this? That's another layer.
A big one.
So our mission, really, in this deep dive, is to try and dissect these points. What does it all tell us about separating the art from the artist?
And, the implications of this whole cancel culture idea.
And where does responsibility, actually lie in these really complex situations? It's messy.
It is messy. And if you look at the bigger picture, this specific case just highlights that tension we always seem to come back to.
Which is?
Appreciating the art, the creation, but then condemning the harmful personal actions. It's like walking a tightrope for society.
Okay, so let's start with Brat's main stance. The article quotes her saying, when I listen to a song, I'm appreciating the art, the creativity. It's not an endorsement of the artist's personal life or choices. So this sounds like she's drawing a pretty clear line there.
Yeah, a very distinct line. The music is one thing, the person is another.
And the core insight there, I think, is that fundamental conflict. Liking the art, but disapproving morally of the artist. Something many of you listening have probably felt.
That's a really crucial point. And the article also points out, importantly, that for a lot of people, R. Kelly's music isn't just background noise.
No, it's embedded, right?
Deeply embedded in pop culture, tied to personal memories, specific times, cultural moments. So regardless of everything else, the music itself has had this huge impact.
Right, its place in our collective memory is undeniable.
Yeah.
But then we get to that other comment. Where are the parents in all this?
It's a controversial part.
The article really details how that just immediately sparked a lot of criticism. People arguing it shifts the focus, away from R. Kelly himself.
Right. And potentially minimizes how serious the accusations are.
You can see why that specific comment hits such a raw nerve.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit like victim blaming to some ears.
Exactly. And that raises the question of accountability. Where do we point the finger? Critics see comments like that as a deflection.
Trying to shift the blame.
Yeah, potentially undermining the victim's experiences and, crucially, the direct responsibility of the person accused. They'd say it creates a dangerous narrative suggesting the main failure was somewhere else entirely.
Okay, but the article also mentions there are people defending Brat too.
There are.
Suggesting she might be raising a point, maybe a valid one, about the wider responsibility, parents, guardians, maybe even the industry itself.
Right. Perhaps she's hinting at a more systemic issue within the entertainment world, the need to protect young people.
So, not excusing the alleged actions, but broadening the scope of responsibility.
Precisely. These defenders might argue that while, of course, the primary responsibility lies with the person doing the harm,
Sure.
there are still legitimate questions about the systems, or maybe the lack of systems. Were there things in place that could have stopped this?
Like the role of record labels, management, that whole structure.
Exactly. That's a systemic issue that goes way beyond just one individual. And the article mentions the social media reaction really shows the split.
Yeah, people were all over the place.
Totally. From real disappointment to others supporting her for, quote, speaking her truth. It just shows how differently people are interpreting her words.
And it's not just the public, right? The article touches on the industry, too.
Yeah, briefly. It mentions this divide among artists and insiders.
So some are clearly distancing themselves, emphasizing support for survivors.
Yes, very publicly. But then you have others, maybe like Brat, who seem to be, wrestling with it.
Caught between the music's influence and the artist's alleged behavior.
It's a really difficult spot, quite sobering to think about the internal conflicts this stuff creates within that community.
Yeah, that internal conflict among artists is really telling, isn't it?
It really is. It highlights that uncomfortable truth. You can have immense talent and allegedly deeply problematic behavior in the same person.
Which forces these incredibly tough choices for people who collaborated or just admired the work.
Absolutely.
Which brings us right back to that central dilemma, doesn't it? Can we Can we really separate the art from the artist?
That feels like the absolute core question here. And in so many similar cases,
Where do you draw that line? Is there even a line?
well, that's the thing. There's no single easy answer. And that's why these conversations are so fraught.
Right.
Philosophically, it gets into, does the value of art live only in its form, its sound, its words?
Or is it tied to the creator?
Yeah.
The context?
Exactly. Is its meaning inherently linked to who made it and how it was made? For some people, the artist's actions just irrevocably taint the art. It's spoiled.
Can't listen anymore.
Can't listen. But for others, the work itself holds some kind of independent value. The boundary seems to be incredibly personal.
Depends on the situation, maybe. Your own values.
I think so. Very much contingent on the specifics and your own moral compass.
And this whole thing ties directly into that bigger ongoing conversation about cancel culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Brat saying she won't stop listening, as the article kind of implies.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a pushback against just completely cutting someone off.
It does.
Is muting the artist, always the best response, the most effective one?
Well, that just adds another layer of complexity, right? Does completely pulling support, silencing the work, does that actually fix the root problems?
Or does it just erase things? Maybe important cultural contributions, without really getting to accountability or understanding.
That's the debate. Some argue it's a necessary social consequence, a way to hold people accountable.
While others worry it goes too far. Affects artistic expression itself.
Yeah, concerns about overreach, chilling effects, that kind of thing.
Ultimately, this whole situation, as the article really points out, it just forces us to grapple with some really uncomfortable questions.
About our own values.
Our responsibilities as, consumers of art. How do we navigate this intersection of creativity and personal conduct when that conduct is deeply disturbing?
And what's interesting, I think, is that Brat's perspective, however you feel about it personally, it really underscores that the R. Kelly situation isn't black and white. It's not simple right versus wrong.
No, it's definitely complex.
It's this really complicated mix of maybe admiration for the talent, profound disappointment, anger over the alleged harm, and a whole lot of personal soul searching.
Yeah, introspection about where you stand on it all.
Exactly.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, we've looked at that core tension, wanting to appreciate art versus needing to hold people accountable.
That fundamental push and pull.
And we've seen how differently people and the music industry itself are trying to figure out responsibility in these incredibly tough situations.
Which leads us to maybe a final thought for you, the listener.
Okay.
Think about an artist whose work really, truly means something to you. Something that resonates deeply.
Get one in mind.
Okay. Now imagine if significant, really negative information about their personal life came out. How would that actually impact your relationship with their art? Is there a specific point, a line, where separating the two just becomes impossible for you? Or maybe even feels unethical?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a deeply personal question.
It is. No easy answers, like we said. But definitely something worth thinking about.